When I was making my last video, Heirs and Heiresses, When Fortune Becomes Misfortune, I included Abigail Folger, the heiress to the Folger Coffee Company who was murdered by the Manson family. I found out Abigail Folger had attended fundraisers for the Haight-Ashbury Medical Clinic. The Haight-Ashbury Medical Clinic was a free clinic in Northern California. It opened in 1967 during the counterculture movement. The Manson family women had been going to the clinic during the time Abigail Folger and her mother were raising money for the clinic. Abigail later being murdered by the Manson family in Southern California is a coincidence. The Manson family certainly wasn't keeping tabs on her and probably didn't even know of her existence until the night she was murdered. But it stood out to me because coincidences in murder cases are always creepy. It reminded me of rumors of a connection between the Manson family and the CIA that I had read about years ago when that was my pet case, but never actually put any stock in it because it seemed too conspiratorial and out there. I hadn't thought about it for a long time until I read an interview with Tom O'Neill, author of the book Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s. Tom O'Neill is an investigative journalist who was first tasked to write about the Manson family in 1999 for the 30th anniversary of the murders. He ended up falling down a massive rabbit hole. He was shocked to realize that the narrative that the public has been fed about the Manson family was inaccurate. He investigated this for 20 years, and in 2019 released his book. Now, his book doesn't argue that the Manson family is innocent, and neither does this video, but rather that there was more to the story than what the public was led to believe. There's a ton of things he talks about in his book, but the element of the seemingly hidden story that I'm focusing on for this video is the Haight-Ashbury Medical Clinic. The founder of the Haight-Ashbury Medical Clinic was a man named David Smith, who was also a drug researcher. He said he opened the clinic so that young people would have free medical treatment that otherwise wouldn't be available to them, and so it seemed like he had a philanthropic reason to open the clinic. But he may have actually had a motive to open the clinic. What he didn't mention was that the federal government was giving him grants, and he in turn was keeping records of patients' behavior and drug use, then passing that information back to the federal government. So did David Smith have any actual connection to Charles Manson? It turns out he did have direct contact with the Manson family and even studied them about 15 months before the 1969 Tate LaBianca murders. In 1968, he published his findings titled A Case Study of the Charles Manson Group Marriage Commune, in which he said that Manson, quote, could probably be diagnosed as an ambulatory schizophrenic. David Smith gave an office in the building to Dr. Lewis West, a psychiatric researcher. He had been studying at Stanford, but was always vague about what exactly it was he was studying there. But he did say he was going to write a book about LSD and its effect on young people. He needed people to study, and David Smith gave him that office to do just that. In 1977, journalist Seymour Hersh wrote a story for the New York Times in which he identified Dr. West as being one of 6 subcontractors for the U.S. government CIA-operated mind control research project MKUltra. Now, as soon as someone mentions MKUltra, the immediate reaction is to dismiss it because it sounds so crazy, but the MKUltra project itself, which has been documented and verified as an actual CIA project, was a crazy and horrifying secret operation. If you're not familiar with MKUltra, Project MKUltra wasn't officially halted until 1973, but while in operation, it sought to find ways to weaken and manipulate a subject's mind through the use of psychoactive drugs, hypnosis, torture, electroshock therapy, isolation, and other forms of abuse. And not all of their subjects were people who had given consent to be tested on. Some historians believe the CIA was trying to create Manchurian candidates, people brainwashed into being unwitting assassins. Tom O'Neill managed to get access to Dr. West's personal papers and found out that not only was it true that he was a part of Project MKUltra, but that he also, quote, wrote the blueprint for how they were going to operate and hide their research, that it was going to be conducted at prisons and universities and psychiatric hospitals and in the general population. Research criminologist Roger Smith, no relation to David Smith, was preparing a study about communes and amphetamines in the youth of Haight-Ashbury. More specifically, how gangs form, what type of people are more susceptible to join gangs, the relationship between gangs and drugs, and how gangs using drugs creates violence. Court documents also list him as a research pharmacologist. He was based in the Haight-Ashbury Clinic as a parole officer, and initially had many parolees, but eventually only had one, Charles Manson. Roger Smith had Manson reporting to him weekly at the clinic after Manson was released from prison in 1967. Manson had lived in Northern California during this time, but that part of his life isn't really touched upon by Vincent Bugliosi in his book Helter Skelter, even though it was during that period that Manson was sharpening his skills in persuasion. Manson was also repeatedly violating his parole. O'Neill obtained records through the Freedom of Information Act and discovered that Manson had been arrested way more times than had been previously reported, and those arrests, for crimes such as narcotics, possession, and grand theft auto, never led to any charges and never led to his parole being revoked. It was almost as if he had a get-out-of-jail-free card. Eventually, Manson told his parole officer he was leaving the area to head to Southern California, another violation, and nothing was done about it. Once in Southern California and living at Spawn Ranch, the LAPD conducted one of the biggest busts at the time. They arrested Manson and a few dozen others. They found stolen cars and license plates, weapons including a submachine gun, narcotics, and underage teen runaways. Despite the LAPD naming Manson as a federal parolee and the ringleader of the group, he was not charged and his parole was not revoked. Bugliosi claimed it was because the warrant was misdated, but O'Neill found a copy of that warrant and found that to be untrue. So why was Charles Manson repeatedly allowed to break the law while on parole? Sometimes criminals slip through the cracks due to incompetence or miscommunication. So O'Neill went to Louis Watnick, the now retired Van Nuys district attorney, and showed him the documents he had collected regarding Manson being repeatedly arrested and released. Watnick had an interesting reaction, saying, quote, "This man was deliberately released again and again and again, when not only should he have been charged, but he should have been violated by his parole officer." Followed by, "Yeah, there was something going on here that they didn't want out at the trial or since then." Watnick said in his experience, the only reason this ever happens is if the person getting arrested is an informant. Manson was not the only one to avoid any serious legal repercussions. Other Manson family members had been arrested multiple times for various offenses, but would receive only probation. Given the other connections, is it possible that Charles Manson was a willing or unwilling participant in Project MKUltra? Author Carol Green claims in her book Test Tube Murder, The Case of Charles Manson, that Manson was a research subject for NIM, the National Institute of Mental Health, for a project designed to observe drug addiction in white teenagers. An interesting note, NIM co-sponsored the Schizophrenia Research Project, a project studying schizophrenic men and antipsychotic pharmaceutical drugs. This study was also funded by the Esalen Institute, a non-profit retreat center that focuses on humanistic alternative education. The Esalen Institute is located in Big Sur, California. Its location is almost 5 hours away from Spawn Ranch, but Charles Manson drove there and back, just days before the Tate and LaBianca murders. We'll never know exactly what kind of damage MKUltra ultimately caused, because when the Watergate scandal broke, all of the official MKUltra documents were destroyed, or at least that's what was supposed to happen. The only reason Project MKUltra is known to the world today is because while a majority of the documents were destroyed, 20,000 official documents survived. Now, none of this solidly proves that Charles Manson and the Manson family were directly, though unknowingly, part of Project MKUltra. It's all circumstantial, but it is curious that the connections are there. People were shocked at the sheer brutality of the murders, which could be described as overkill due to the victims being stabbed way more times than what's necessary to kill a person. Then people were shocked again when they found out that the perpetrators ended up being who they were. Many of the Manson family members came from dysfunctional, sometimes abusive homes, but most of them didn't have a criminal record or violent background before joining the group. They weren't really any different from other youths of the time, and yet some became murderers or accessories to murder, or at the very least accessories after the fact. It's of course completely possible that all of this is entirely coincidence, but a complete 180 in personality and morals coupled with those connections that I outlined here, it also seems possible that there really was more to the story of the Manson murders. While Abigail Folger helped her mother raise money for the clinic, I think it's extremely unlikely that she or her mother had any shady or government-related intentions. It's a creepy coincidence, but that's all. It was the mention of the Haight-Ashbury Clinic that led me to read about its other connections to the Manson family, connections that may or may not be a coincidence. For Abigail it was, as she was known to have been passionate about volunteer work, and this was just one of many ways in which she helped out the community. She was also involved in the civil rights movement and seemed to be a very compassionate person. That was something about Abigail that I wanted to address, since she's almost always referred to as the Folger coffee heiress, and that's pretty much it. So whatever happened to the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic? According to a July 2019 article from the San Francisco Weekly, the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic was set to close after 52 years in operation.